Africa is charting its own path towards a just and equitable transition, one rooted in its realities, knowledge systems, and development priorities. With the launch of a continental framework by the Just Transition Platform, African leaders across energy, labor, trade, agriculture, and gender justice are advancing principles that center economic justice, decent work, climate resilience, and gender equality. As climate policies evolve, Africa must reject extractive models and ensure transitions are African-led, inclusive, and fair, where women, workers, and youth are protected and not left behind. This moment demands bold action, African ownership, and a justice-first approach to climate solutions. Here's what members of the Just Transition Platform have to say. Dive into the dialogue and be part of the movement.
I think the key challenge we have in the solar industry is we cannot standardize solar because it's based on the climate. Okay? And the challenge, washing machine is indoor. You know the amount of energy you have to use based on the load. So they say 3/4 gives you this amount, etc. But the challenge we are having with solar, and you're rightly so, we cannot standardize it. However, most industries will refer you back to the data sheet, which says that you need 1,000 watts per square meter of irradiance. The temperature has to be 25. That's why when Africa we say we have a lot of sun, I laugh, because the higher the temperature, the lower the efficiency. Okay? So everybody say we have sun, yeah, God bless you. Efficiency drops. Air mass has to be 1.5. So on a day like this, you are getting only about 200 watts per square meter. That's the only standard universally we have. The other standards are think of your tilt angle, think of your rotation, and it's been generalized because you cannot, under any circumstance, use a standard to fit every. Yesterday I picked on the PVs I've seen around, some of you have seen around that. So that's the biggest challenge we have with that. It goes with wind as well, because you need at least over 100 meters, you need wind speeds of between 15 meters per second to about 20 for you to turn that one blade round. Okay, so places like Ghana, there's no wind, 100 meters above.
How do we make this people centered?
Just one blade.
So in all of this, how do we ensure it's...
We do, the test standards are there.
Yes.
The test standards are there. That's what we can never meet, because the test standards are.
Do you want to explain a little bit more when you say that there's too much sun, efficiency goes down? Because I think that's just very plain.
Okay.
Green ones.
Okay, we'll come back to the people standard. Okay, so the basic concept of solar cells is the excitation of electrons. The electron has to, I'm taking you back to physics. The electron has to jump from the valence band to the conduction band. Now you need the accurate energy for it to jump into the conduction band. You provide them more heat, it will jump out of the conduction band and generate heat. You provide the less energy, it will never get to that conduction band. So it needs the right EV, electron volt, for it to get in. Now, because we have so much sun, we have so much excitation, it's like the solar is on drugs, steroids. Okay, so that's all it's doing. And as it excites and it's not generating power, it's generating heat. That's why underneath the panel is so hot, nothing can grow underneath that panel. And I was talking to, I think, Jerome and Robert, that now we are looking at agrivoltage, where we are trying to understand the height for which we can grow things under. So you are right. The problem is the heat is not for solar. The heat is for concentrators. So we have the mirror technology where, for instance, in US, the Google is now the biggest. I think Saudi Arabia has come. Morocco has also generated that, where it focuses to a molten tower, a salt tower, and then it converts that salt to about 3,000 to 5,000 degrees of heat to turn heat turbines to generate electricity. We have to move away from silicon cells, but silicon cells are the cheapest, and the efficiency is only 16% as a module. Okay, so we are trying to get efficiencies higher. Amorphous is better, but the efficiency is only 8%. So that means that you need a larger space to get this power through.
I think we need a training session for all of this, especially
So
on
let
the
me
masterclass.
let me jump
The
on away
masterclass,
from
but
that.
yes, I think we should do something
But we
about it.
can do that. But people centered wise,
Because there is a cost to it, right? We are paying
Yes.
for
huge.
So let's connect.
We are paying significantly for inefficiencies, and I think people centered. People should understand the technology they're actually using, because no matter how much indoor air quality will give, and I think I was complaining to Rukia the first day when we had our chat, took her outside and asked her to walk back into the room we were having our meeting in. We said we don't want to scare anyone. Under normal circumstances, I will not sit in that room after 30 minutes. It was so polluted. The environment we sat in was so polluted because the ventilation, I don't know how many of you saw the grills this way.
Yeah, we did.
Now the ventilation grill is up there and it's taken right out that way. None of us were receiving actual fresh air. The only fresh air was when the door was open. We did that experiment and I said, okay, what do you smell? And it was so polluted. I kept it to myself because we didn't have a room. Oh no, I didn't keep it. I shared it to them. If you want to blame anyone for your health reasons, go to her, not me. But we have to understand the technology we are using. Simple things like indoor plants.
Yes.
How many of you think indoor plants is good for your health?
Some
Which one?
snake plants.
Okay, so I dismiss snake plant. I dismiss snake plant.
Peace lily. Spider plant.
Peace lily. I've not tested spider plant. Pothos, etc. But we have to understand people center. Which one is good for you? Anyone who has allergies should not use peace lily. People centered. I have hay fever, so I cannot get close to peace lily, even though I have peace lily in my house. Immediately it's budding, I tell the boys, move it to that corner, let daddy breathe. Then we bring it back. So you have to understand the technology. Jokingly, the solar issue for me is a sad situation because we've put up all these solar panels. It's for the people, but we don't even have the right angle to generate the power. Forget about the angle. We don't even have the right orientation to generate the power. So which people are we generating the power to? How is Kenya calculating the 95%? If I'm to calculate, I think you guys are actually down. They're down. Exactly. Just the installation doesn't mean we've got the power. So we have to understand. How many of us have laptops? We all know how to use our laptops. If you don't know how to use your laptop, it's a huge inefficiency. You don't need one. Why would you go for a laptop? How many of you use i3? Laptop i3.
Now,
It will take 20 years to switch on. So you go for i5, i7. You understand the technology. I use a Huawei, whatever is a phone, whichever. Some people want Samsung. Some people want Mac.
iPhone.
I hate Mac because I don't understand why instead of you pressing something, you have to do this and this and this and this. I don't. So understanding the technology is the fundamental. And it goes back to what we're saying. We have to educate. Anytime I have a class full of Africans in my solar class, the first thing I do is a post-it note, why are you here? We have abundance of sun, blah, 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 blah. After the first minute, I say, if this is the reason why you are here, oh yeah, go back to your country. I can't give that to you. Then we go through the education, getting the right understanding of these technologies is the fundamental.
Very last. Yes, please, because we need to go. Yeah.
Do you want me to go and see?
You know what I want to ask you? These guys are saying that we need to get it to 5 degrees.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Very
not
good.
getting there. What is that?
Okay.
Sorry. I'm going to jump in. Can we potentially take it out of here, because I feel like we've gone. I think we should have a round table and a master class. Yes, and discuss. But just please in 5 seconds.
5 seconds now.
Okay,
She's
20
depriving
seconds.
me of my people-centered.
20 seconds. We'll have a master class focused on that.
And I can talk to you if you have time. I can go and see because you are very close to the equator. It's 5 degrees, maximum 10 degrees to get the efficiency. I've not even talked about technology. The best technology is monocrystalline. It's black and it's black. Any other technology, don't even install it. It's a waste of your money. 5 seconds gone. Done.
Anyways, I think we're going to have a master.
Very good. Go ahead, Kristen.
Okay, thank you. You asked so many questions. I hope I will try to answer. I will start with your first question. That was who owns energy in our context, in our country. From where I'm coming from in Benin. Energy, let's say electricity, is owned by foreign countries around Benin. Our electricity comes from
What do you mean
Ghana.
when you say it's owned? It's foreign owned.
Sorry.
For those of us who are not from Benin, what exactly does that mean?
Is it imported, or is it that their power
Yeah.
plants developed by foreign companies, or is it
Was
imported
imported.
from
It
Nigeria and
is
other countries?
imported from Nigeria. It is imported from Ghana.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. And we know who are in charge of electricity, energy in Ghana, in Nigeria, fossil fuels countries. So, our current situation in Benin, we still have about 40% of our population without electricity. And that's, our government doesn't really own the energy. When Nigeria or Ghana decide that Benin doesn't have electricity, we don't have electricity in Benin. Yeah, we are blackout. So that's the situation. Now when we talk about community-centered justice transition, some key words come to my mind, and I've heard from our colleagues here. We need community needs first. That's where things should start from. We need to focus on community needs. I also think that we need to think about community participation, very important, to have community around the table where we are planning and making decisions. Community participation is very important, and the local empowerment. We need to give power to community, to give tools, to give resources to community, to involve communities in everything that we are talking about. Right now, we still have less participation from our communities when we mention this topic, and I think we need to work on local participation, local empowerment, and also insist on the needs from the local community in bottom-up approach, not top-down approach, very important. And I also think we need to engage on some policies like some barriers in many of our country, policy barriers that prevent the development of renewable energy in our countries. I don't know for many of you, but in my country, in Benin, it's still difficult today. Even if we have some, let's say, in the Ministry of Environment, we have an office. In our Ministry of Energy, we have an office very focused on renewable energy, but we still have so many barriers to the development of policies on renewable energy. And these are some of the things that I think we need to touch, to work on. Community needs, participation, empowerment, community empowerment by giving power, tools, resources to our communities, and to also engage and to touch on some of the barriers that we have.
Thank you so much, Christian. I think one thing you said, or two words that I took from what you said is power and a voice. So giving the people the power and then a voice to be able to share what it is they need, what they want, what's affecting them, but also power to sort of be part of deciding their fate, as you said. It's even much worse because you're saying that another country or other countries completely govern at least in terms of energy, electricity. So we haven't even talked about the communities even owning potentially their own energy systems, potentially maybe through cooperatives or other methods. So I mean, I guess there's a long way to go, and maybe when we go around, we can also dive back in on some of those policy barriers you mentioned and how we view them from a people-centered lens. But please, go ahead.
Yeah, picking from what Christian was saying and what you have re-echoed on power and voice, and looking at the broader discourse around climate action and just transition. For Africa, for example, everybody would think that we would talk agriculture as up there, as a key. But agriculture comes as a second thought. We're looking at energy, we're looking at mitigation and the rest in the discourse. And yet, agriculture would speak to the people's need in Africa, because that's where economies of Africa actually are driving. One time somebody was telling me, I hope you'll not quote me. So, neighboring country, the president was saying that, you see, why they'll never have a mass revolution, or even a fool can have 2 meals a day because they can feed themselves. So because food is there. But now with threats of drought, floods coming in, I mean, when that food is taken away, then you'll have these people on your door. So the narrative right now, if we are to change to have the people's voice for Africa, I think energy would come second or third. We'll be looking at discourse around agriculture. But also they know that, empowering agriculture means empowering the vulnerable. And that's where the people-centered just transition speaks to, because it speaks to transforming economies to start looking at where the need is. Because the current trajectory is giving us the results we're now suffering from. So that's my first point. The second point is, from the workers' perspective, is the issue of informality. Now, for Africa, it is a big thing. Until recently, I was working with the International Transport Workers Federation. And one of the things we're doing around Africa is to do what we call labor impact assessments. Because if you went to any city, who's moving the millions of people to work, to hospital, for medical care, children to school? It is the informal transport facilities. But you go to any city council, any government officials, and ask, do they even know the numbers of these informal, or how even these people are operating? No. So you cannot therefore move our economies to respond to our challenges if even you don't know the numbers to plan for. So for the transport sector, for example, every city we've done labor impact assessment in Nairobi, Kampala, Abidjan, Dhaka, Accra, Maputo. None. Everybody has their own numbers. Now, if you go now to transform those numbers into, for example, mass transportation, what plans where are you going to have the baseline? And yet, the informal sector itself is organized. But they're organized in the way that even the labor movement doesn't recognize, in the way that governments don't recognize, in what we call cooperatives. Kenya, fortunately for Kenya, they have passed a law that mandates that for everybody operating in public transport has to be in a cooperative. Actually, yesterday, was that Arnold was asking what would be a headline. My headline would be informal to influencers of African economies through cooperatives. Because you see, there's a lot of money in the public transport, that is there. We're looking for financing to finance this transition was talking about. For example, electric vehicles. But nobody has quantified how much financial flows are currently in there, such that you know how much then would you want to put into. By enhancing, for example, the cooperatives that are there and making them do better. One of the key requirements some of these cooperatives and informal work organizations were asking us is not even money. They're asking us to give them literacy in financial management such that they are able to make their monies realize savings to tap into either now buying electric vehicles. But nobody is talking about that. So before even you go asking anybody for help, the guys are here. So a big policy shift by our own planners is also a big one for a people-centered just transition.
Thank you so much. If I just dig down into what you said, few things. Agric needs to be more salient as we go through and as we consider what a just transition means, because empowering people through agriculture empowers the people in the first place. And then you talked about informality and even understanding the extent of informality, the numbers. So if I hear you, a policy shift could potentially be getting the data around whether it's informality, but also around the sectors connected to it. So whether it's the transport sector that you mentioned, and whether it's the number of the people, you talked about the financial flows coming in around EVs and things like that. So if I hear you, data is one thing that we also need to ensure is there. And I think when we're looking at the people, as the transition and as the economy transitions, they need to, and when we say empowered, financial literacy is one of the ways, because whether people are reskilled, they get new skills, whether they move to new sectors, or whether they remain where they are but are somehow empowered, they need that financial literacy to be empowered to be sustainable and to remain relevant in this journey that we're going through. So yeah, thank you.
In Uganda now there is something called moving the masses to the money economy. Why? Everybody right now in Uganda, even my poor old mama in the village, I have to buy her a phone because the communication companies have had what we call mobile money. So those days for me to send my mom maybe 200,000 Uganda shillings, I would spend a quarter of that money because you have to travel there, because you gave somebody, she will not get that right amount. So you have to travel there, so you cut into what you cannot. But the advent of these mobile phones, now I send her exactly the money she'll get and do what she wants. But we are not tapping into that for positioning them for information around, for example, just to know tomorrow, maybe it could be rainy, it may be what, for you to do ABC. Or you harvested your granite. There is somebody here who may buy it at this kind of. We can't tap into that technology that is already there, but now the corporate world has grabbed that. In Uganda right now, those days you would send money for a very minimum cost, but now because it is claimed that about less than 2 million Ugandans have bank accounts or something, but there are about 15 million Ugandans on mobile phones, and all those 15 million have a mobile phone account that is operating. At least transaction maybe in a week could be twice or so. So the banks now went and lobbied the parliament to pass a law. Now the monies for transaction alone are prohibited. So instead of benefiting the people that the technology is supposed to serve, now we are seeing a new trend of exploiting what would have been a good way of trying to empower our local people to get into the money economy. You don't need now to go to a bank and go through all this to get a bank account. You can have a mobile phone that is your bank, that is your security, that you can operate anywhere. You can see how the unfairness comes, and the transitions one can easily be hijacked and become not people-centered. But we need actual, maybe that's the next point on yours, institutionalizing this and having real, very good hard law policies that can protect some of these new good things that are emerging.
Can you repeat again that injustice? Because it is known that like M-Pesa has made a lot of transformation to rural people. Where is injustice coming
M-Pesa in Kenya.
Yes,
I heard
M-Pesa.
good things about M-Pesa.
Maybe Robert and my colleagues from Kenya can, but I'll talk from the Uganda perspective. That M-Pesa is the same as mobile money in Uganda. It was a very good, all of us jumped into it, and it was serving the purpose. But right now, because of now government and financial institutions, especially banks, have seen that most of the people who could have been part of their customers are going into mobile phones. So they brought in prohibitive regulations that are undermining the financial inclusion that M-Pesa and the rest were bringing. Because right now, the transaction that we used to use those days, 2 years ago, are now being cut in two. So instead of you now thinking of sending 2,000 shillings to your old mother, that those days you would send, and M-Pesa would cut maybe 50 bob. Now M-Pesa will cut 500 bob. So
it's like
it's
to punish you.
no, it is not. It is now taking advantage of this, because you can now imagine how many of us are sending that kind of, how much money they are now getting out of just the transactions that would have gone to original.
Yeah, people-centered, just transition. I think I'll speak about it in the energy pathway. You can't hear. This is going to be a struggle. She can't hear, and I'm trying to shout. So, close. If no, I think this is fine. Is that okay? Yeah. Today, I think to start with, today, if you move, particularly in Kenya, for example, when you look at the need, the urge by the communities to transform into clean energy sources, people have acquired what we call the small solar systems in their homes, in most of the homes actually. And it's not that the process through which they acquire it is that which satisfies them. In your view, if you look at it, you will see, oh, people are adopting clean energy practices and appliances in the villages. But deep down, if you now come to investigate, you realize that these people suffer in the process of enabling themselves to have sustainable energy or clean energy in their households, where you realize that they access energy facilities and they continue to be poor because they pay forever. In terms of regulatory frameworks on how the private sector engage in terms of development and distribution of these appliances, I think it's organized in a manner that does not favor the common citizen. Here, in the sense that they do not have control or power to determine at what point will I stop paying for this. There are other different approaches that are applying. Some are coming with different companies, with different names and different terms. They'll tell you, when you start, we'll give you a solar, a small TV, and maybe a radio or something. And then you will be paying, let's say, 1,000 Kenya shillings for the first 1 year. After that, it will reduce to around 250 or 500 to 250. And then it reaches a point where you are paying like 15 shillings for the rest of your life. The moment you default, even a single day, you don't have light, you can't watch your TV, you are in the darkness because they are automated and they control them from their centers. So this is where now you don't have the full authority or control over the energy appliances you have. So here there is that level of injustice because now there is no sync in terms of how the government can control on behalf of the citizens, or how the citizens are involved in the process of the policy processes that inform such kind of regulations in terms of when they want to access and use these facilities. So I think for us to now enable justice is where we have to ensure that communities are able to access green energy, but it does not impact on them negatively in terms of impoverishing them like it has been doing to most of them in the villages. Actually, you will see and imagine, they are good, they are doing good, but deep down they are not doing good, because you realize most of those houses are in the dark at night, but they have the facility. So until maybe after 1 week, when they are able to get the money, then they pay, they have a light for another day, it switches off again. So that is not justice, according to me, in terms of how we want people to transition into accessing these kind of facilities and energy systems. So yeah, I think that's one angle we look at it, and because when you want to start bring transformation in the just transition, we need to first investigate really what is happening at the real space where the communities are, those who are in need and those who use these facilities, for example. Yeah, so I think I'll stop there, and we will go around as we continue the conversation. Thank you.
Was scaling up sustainable climate smart agroecology practices for enhanced food security and environmental conservation in the Serengeti ecosystem. Basically, the point was to use climate smart practices to buffer the community entering to the Serengeti game reserves, because the resources are not available, and most of the time community could go to the game reserves to search for firewood, etc. So we got a small grant of 50,000, very small, from GEF, yeah, just to stimulate investment opportunities. And then we were able to work with the local government in Serengeti region, and then we went through all the processes of identifying the location, identify the beneficiaries, identify the stakeholders, etc. And then we did a very good small project on a greenhouse, where we were able to collect those local community women to have some small garden on greenhouses, and then so that they can improve their socioeconomic activities and not relying much on the natural resources from the forests. You know what happened at that particular time? We had two greenhouse equipment for 2 locations, and then the mistake we made, we thought that community empowerment is about women empowerment. So we mostly concentrated on women, and very few men were involved. But the project went very well. The location was like in the street at the village, so everybody could come and they could see that greenhouses and the vegetables, and so it was influencing a lot of people. The regional commissioner were coming to see who is doing this. I will find time, I'll send you the picture, you can see how it was good. And then later on, there was challenges of water for irrigation. We couldn't get enough water because we were using the local community bore. Yeah, so, but when we finished, we can see the capacity building is very important, because they couldn't manage to sustain water availability. And then people were influenced, especially men. Men started to take over to that project because they said, I can't allow my partner to go into the economic activity while myself I'm suffering. So when the project finished after 6 months, all the women were kicked out from the project, and the men started dominating the project, you see. So it went as a focus. But what we learned, the capacity of the local institutions, like the local government, was very low. Because the location of the project was like 30 kilometers from the small city in Serengeti. But to tell even those agriculture extension officers to go and visit those locations, they were asking us about the money to go to look at the area. And they are the government official. They said we don't have any budget to go and visit the sites. And also the water, and also maintenance of the equipment, the greenhouse gases, the pump for water, and the tank for water. It was really difficult. So later on, we thought that we may need to be a bit more innovative we add a component of investments, and they should not be like you take something you give people. No, yeah. So that transformation was very big in such a way that women were empowered, the community were empowered, and then they started their own farm separate apart from the state, and it's perpetuated. And I'm telling you, until now, since 2029, that greenhouse exists until today, and it has influenced so many people. Thank you.
And Ghana, we got it. We went through it. In fact, we went through it in a very bad way. Right? The government woke up one day and said, henceforth, anything that you buy will charge you when you use fintech, when you use MTN mobile money. And nobody could say anything. That is just one example. And there could be many other examples. Now, big things are happening in our societies because Africa is targeted by the powers that be, whether we like it or not. So, telcos who are getting into mobile money are making big monies and worrying the traditional banking system. Are the traditional banking systems going to collaborate at the corporate level with the telcos? Are they going to be, shareholders in those big companies so that they can leverage their share of the processes of, excuse my language, exploitation? Or the telcos are going to set up their own banks. Why won't MTN in Ghana in the near future set up a bank? As of now, the amount of money that they control is so huge. So they have it's logical that you should set up a bank. Now, so a people-centered just transition is really about all the development things. Before climate change, we were talking about development for the people, people-centered development, and so on and so forth. It all depended very much on how organized people are in their different constituencies and sectors so that they can influence the policies that determine how the game is played on a day-to-day basis. So I ask a question. In Kenya, community energy access is being pursued by a certain private sector organization, for example. They use all these mechanisms to encourage people, and the people buy into it. Now, the question that was going on in my mind, when you default, you get sanctioned, right?
Yes.
Do they ever default? The company, does the company ever default?
If the system goes bad?
When they default, what happens? Right. When MTN defaults in Ghana, when there are problems, and then we are not able to, I'm at the airport, and it's happened in real life before. I needed to make transactions in order to travel to Abuja, and the transactions were not going through. They had defaulted. It cost me money.
Yeah.
What happens to them? Nothing. Yeah. But when I default, I'm sanctioned. All the people are sanctioned. So the policies at the highest level are important. You break it down, and there are other sets of policies. And break it down further, there are other sets of policies. Talking about agriculture, you cannot, the policies again, whether we need, the policies again will determine what the people are getting at the level of agricultural production. It's a bad deal. I was one of the people in 2009 who signed the CADEP Compact, and we're very supportive of it. And we have studied it.
What is the CADEP?
Sorry. Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program.
Yeah.
It is an AU program. Right. Yeah, it's still there, but the countries pursue it at their own level. One government in Ghana said that this thing can only be driven if the people, the farmers, the trade unions in agriculture are part of it. That is how come as General Secretary of the Agricultural Workers Union then, I signed as one of the constituents that signed. Now, after that, Peasants Association, this Women's Association, etc., they all signed. But beyond that, what again? There was a policy of promoting genetically modified organisms. And then imported hybrids. And I raised the question that, hey, wait a minute. Zimbabwe and India have been victims of Green Revolution agriculture, where they introduce hybrids in a certain manner. Don't get me wrong. In a certain manner. And then after year 1, huge harvest. Year 2, even bigger harvest. Year 3, fairly good. But they have to pay a higher price. So after 5 years, every subsequent increase in production, you use a larger proportion of the harvest to pay for the seeds and the agrochemicals. And by Jove, who, excuse my language again, who in his right senses will say that as a continent, what we use, what we put in the soil in order to get our food must come from somewhere? I mean, with all due respect, you have to buy the seed. South Africa, your traditional seeds are almost gone. Right? A people-centered agricultural development and a people-centered just transition in agriculture necessarily entails ensuring that the people in agriculture have more and more control, incrementally, it will happen overnight, over the amount of seeds that they plant themselves. If this year 80% of the seeds that they are planting, or 50, are imported, next year you want them to import 40%. And a year after that, 30%. And a year after that, 20%. A parallel development is that we have indigenous development of seed plasma, and there are a number of institutions on the continent which are working on them. UPOF tried to do that, right? And the AU, as usual, the bureaucratism is slowing it down, but you are there, so it will work better. Right? This is the people-centered thing. You mentioned agriculture. We need to fertilizer. We need to increase the use of fertilizer. Of course, 2 types of fertilizer. Germany is phasing out artificial chemical fertilizer. You know that? Yeah. And Netherlands, the same. But we are increasing it. And in fact, there's an element of dumping in it. Right? It's there. And the problem is that huge. So you need a certain framework to use in measuring the things. One of them is what I've mentioned, what proportion of the seeds that we are planting is locally produced. What proportion of the fertilizers that we are using are artificial fertilizers, right? And those artificial fertilizers, how much of it is imported and how much of it is locally produced. Fertilizer is not rocket science. We can produce it in this place. But the policy makers are beneficiaries of the import regimes that depend on fertilizer. We tell them all the time. To tell them that we are saying it. We know that the policy makers are beneficiaries.
We have a fertilizer, Africa Fertilizer Center in Zimbabwe.
Right.
It has never worked.
Exactly.
Since, I don't know when, nobody is want to put money there, but they want fertilizer from Ukraine.
Exactly.
And who is funding them? I'm telling you, AFDB. And
AFDB. Yeah. AFDB.
So I'm telling you, this is a sabotage.
Complete sabotage.
Because we have Joseph Asako was the cry to revitalize the fertilizer company until today. It is there, and the people who are employed there, they're getting salary, but the fertilizer company is not working. Why? Why we don't have a continental fertilizer industry? And we are importing fertilizer.
Maybe Morocco has one, but that's
Morocco also.
right? That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Just one more word on energy.
No, go ahead.
I do some work with the Public Services International, and for about 5 years now, they've been talking about campaigning against privatizing energy, right? Which trade unions support. And the evidence on the ground shows that wherever they privatized energy, the story got worse.
What part of the energy value chain?
That's a good question. In our countries, generally speaking, we've known the governments, right, to set up public institutions that generate the power and distribute the power. In fact, there are two levels of distribution. There's a wholesale, and then
retail.
there's a retail. Right. So it's a good question. The important thing is, to what extent does a country have control over how much power that is being produced, first and foremost? Right. I don't have an answer to that. I don't have expertise in that. The general perspective is that we want to control what we need as a public good. Health, water, energy are public goods. We want a certain control. Now, talking about solar, for example, what prevents, instead of a private organization, right, setting up some solar scheme, blah, 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 what prevents a district or a municipality from being in charge of that, setting up a private company, right, with the members of the community buying shares in it,
cooperatives,
and so it's like, it's a profit-making organization which plows back and benefits the community members to the extent that they've put money into it. I've seen that in northern part of Italy in relation to water, where municipalities set up companies, right? A whole district that we don't want to, you can privatize the water, but we want to be in charge of the water that we drink. It's our life. So we'll collect monies. And they discourage any particular person from having monopoly control by putting in too much money. There are mechanisms, there are schemes. People-centered just transition requires that increasingly the people, we are moving towards giving more power. I mean, energy and power and control and influence to the people in relation to the choices that we make, be it in finance, be it in agriculture, be it in, My last note is that the women here, we've been gossiping about you. We said that we have, no, seriously. We have gender activists in this group. We have gender activists, very strong gender activists in this group, who are very strong. I mean, in terms of articulation and eloquence and all that. And we've been saying that.
I thought that was for us.
No, but it's good that we share. It's good that we share. And yet, we have not felt intimidated at all. Because we share this, and then you can also share with other gender activists. I work with a gender organization in Ghana. And they say, sometimes we go to a meeting, a few women will be there, they will talk, they will ask you questions, 1, 2, 3, and before long, we'll do this, and we are done. We are sitting there. We don't have this in this meeting. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brother Kingsley. I think he said, okay, Dean, yes. I just want to pick on a few key points that you mentioned. Dean will come next, and then Chirono, you wanted to come. After Dean. But a few points that I've been gathering from everyone. Some keywords, and later I'll ask you to share some more keywords. A voice, power, control, influence. These are some of the things that I picked from what others have said and what you said. What do people want? They want to be involved in, they want to have a voice in organizing, they want to be able to influence the decisions, the policies, they want to have control over the systems that govern them, whether it's the agri, whether it's the energy. They want to be part of the policy designs. And then one thing you said I don't think we've talked much about is measuring. What metrics? So are we monitoring, evaluating, and what metrics are we using to, or not us, or who is even measuring? That's the question. And I think that's one thing that needs to come into play. But I think the last point that you said, then I think leads back to, I think, a point that was raised yesterday about private-public community partnerships or something like that. So this point you made around the municipalities coming together with the communities as well, clearly something that would give more voice, power and control, as well as influence to the people who are involved, who are affected, who are part of it. So yeah, Dean, please come in.
Is your intervention in line with what they were saying?
Maybe just a little, but no.
Very different, yes. Yes.
But it's popcorn, so we don't have to.
It's popcorn, yes. Just pick and
No, I just wanted to talk about how we've been talking a lot about the just transition and the people-centered approach. And I've been doing a lot of thinking around the idea that sometimes policy shift is necessary, but we don't have enough people to actually push for that. So it's only within the advocacy space or the CSO space where we're actually saying we want policy to be, rewritten and reimagined. But essentially the people who are not in these spaces essentially do not know. And it's not a capacity building issue as well, essentially, but it's more like a movement power, right? If we look at Kenya, for example, the reason why the tech school didn't, work out is because essentially we saw normal people going out to the streets to say no, essentially, right? And we need to come up with ways of it being a movement-led process when we look at just transition and how we want to understand it, essentially. If you look at the results from Ecuador when they announced, there'll never be, what was the announcement around the moratorium on oil, right, last year?
Yes.
It was also, again, the people. It wasn't, CSOs pushing, it was the people leading the way, essentially. So there have been different moments, right? So, I mean, if you look at it back in 1994 when, there were no ARVs in Africa. That was also a people-led process where people went out on the streets and they demanded, to be included within that process, and that unlocked so much. So there's a lot for us to nuance around a movement-led process when it comes to the just transition. And then the other aspect is greenwashing. On my aspect, I think it's very difficult to frame renewables against coal-fired power stations because the people in that space have had their jobs guaranteed, essentially. We're not doing anything to show that once we transition to renewable energy, there'll be better jobs. And we say it, right? We say it's buzzwords, right? Renewable energy sector will employ more women, but there are no living examples. The renewable sector is going to provide more and more jobs, but there are no living examples. So we need to create spaces. Probably they're there, but they're not well documented.
Yeah.
But we need to start mindfully thinking around, if we are going to be trying to center renewable energy as a solutions-oriented approach, how do we then as well create a platform for it to be well documented? Because we don't have those lived experiences where we can say there's an area, this is the result of what renewable energy did for this area fundamentally. So essentially we are pushing an alternative agenda, but without a lived experience. We are so fantastic at explaining what is wrong and broken in the system, but we have failed to articulate how we can actually produce a solutions-oriented framework, holistically. Also, I might be wrong. Maybe it's a me problem, but I'm happy for everyone to think around their thoughts. The second aspect around greenwashing is that the very same people we are trying to have PPCs with participatory frameworks within the communities another reason why we failed to build that movement is because the fossil fuel industry, for example, provides not only jobs but also education and scholarships as well.
Yeah.
And to some extent, something that we all love very much, which is AFCON, the African Cup of Nations. They sponsor Africa's most celebrated football tournament. So this sounds very light, but essentially, if I was to go to someone and be like, do you know how much Total Energies is ruining the African continent? That person might look at you very, very shocked, because essentially to them, they identify Total as the sponsors for AFCON. Total has sent my child to school, they've paid my school fees and everything. So there's this whole greenwashing aspect and big pillar that we need to actually pull out and win, essentially, because we are not going to get the result that we're looking for at the end of the day. So it's a really big holistic approach where, I mean, everyone needs to come in to think about how we are going to essentially all move forward to reimagine what forward thinking looks like, essentially. But these are lived examples at the end of the day. When we go to the airport, the advertising of fossil fuel companies is more and more apparent. So every day, normal people are identifying these spaces. For us Africans, when we take a flight to America, it's such an amazing experience. And when we see Total in Sasol, we're going to think about our first flight experience. But we need to really think of this from a very humane level, because it might seem so small, but it's got so much emotion around it, when you think around some of these spaces. And they've done that very well in terms of owning the space and owning that narrative. And it really is greenwashing, because they do go to communities, and in some instances they do provide scholarships, right? But here's the funny thing as well. The scholarships they provide are more driven around physics or petrochemical engineering, for example, right? And because we're Africans and historically we've been segregated, if I do not have money to go to a good university and I wanted to study development or economics, but then they're offering me to go study petrochemical engineering, I will take it. Because essentially the option would then to be to suffer and to wallow in poverty, essentially. So I think there's a big aspect around greenwashing and even creating a meta-narrative that is really grounded on what it truly means to be African, and linking it with our history and what we've had to endure. Because I think there's a nice way of linking that, because a lot of the time our lived experiences and who we are as Africans is embedded in our social fabric so much that people do take advantage of that, unfortunately. And we have to also wake up every day to reconcile with the idea that, I mean, think about it in this way. I have to wake up every day to reconcile that I live in a world where it's racially segregated. At the end of the day, I'm also black. And in other instances, imagine if you're a woman as well. So there are so many aspects that you have to reconcile with as you wake up every day, and when you think around what
intersectionality
essentially looks like. So I think I just wanted to touch on that, because I think it's important, right? And I think sometimes it's overlooked in some instances. But I think it does tie into everything else that we're all saying. Yeah.
Thank you. You said football, very big. The adverts that we see, they connect to us in specific ways. Scholarships, education, and just how do we connect to all of those human aspects, and then the intersectionality of all of these, and the various layers as Africans that we face, whether it's being from a certain tribe, community, a certain color, a certain gender, a certain religion, because all of these play a role in how we consider some of the just transition elements. So I think various pieces for us to think about, and then see where we can take it forward from there. But Chirono, do you want to go? And Anne, you seem like you're prepped after. Okay, all right.
Is this one? Okay. Yeah. Well, I do love words, right? And I think how we define things gives them power. So when I think of people-centered, I think about what exactly does that mean in terms of the etymology of the word?
Yes.
And what is the alternative? If I was to write the opposite of people-centered, what is that? Right? Like literally, like what would that be, right? What is the opposite of people-centered? Is there like a word to describe what that opposite is? I mean, non-people-centered, yes, but...
Profit-centered.
But like in a word, not in a description.
Profit and...
But we've...
Corporate.
Corporate, okay.
Or what would be like what would be the what would be the opposite in quotes of a people-centered
Well, but we
as
said
form of
that we want
corporate-
community models that are profit. Yeah, so it's not profit. Yeah. Yeah. So it's not about profit.
It's about corporate control and domination.
It's about power.
Yeah,
Okay.
power.
Okay.
Determining and shaping things.
Okay. And then now the second thing is, and you know, at some point I think I had this discussion with someone, right? So you have people-centered, and I wanted to find out what the difference was, right? When we say people-centered in a legal sense, what does that mean? And it seems like in a legal sense, when the word people connotes, when I take a human being and I place them in a specific legal context, and I give them certain legal rights,
Okay.
right? So I define them as people within a jurisdiction. So people within, say, the Kenyan state or the Ghanaian state, because they're subject to certain rights that are defined by that state or that legal body or legal jurisdiction. And then the opposite of that is human, right? Where no matter where you are, right? Whether I'm legally protected according to the law of a certain place or any other place, that applies to me across the board. That's why we talk about human rights, because they're inalienable, meaning that when someone is born and they're human, meaning they have certain rights by virtue of being members of the human race.
Yes.
So the question then becomes, I think, when we talk about people-centered, right? That means then that it means it's not universal. We cannot say people-centered and imagine that that is a universal principle, because people is legally defined based on a jurisdiction or another, and that changes across the board. But human is universal. So when I say your human rights, right, it means when you have human rights organizations, they fight for your human rights because you're a member of the human race. So you don't have to be, you can be a refugee with perhaps no specific legal rights, right, or any, you don't subscribe or you don't belong to any country, right, or a migrant or any other person, but you are a human, so you have human rights. So I guess that begs the question, right, when you talk about people said, are we
Human versus
really
people?
talking about a human, yeah,
Or human versus people-centered.
yeah, are you talking about a human-centered transition, or are we talking about a people-centered transition? Because I think there is a bit of a difference there.
About people-centered transition that observes human rights.
Yes.
I think it should be that way.
Yeah.
People-centered transition that is able to observe the aspects of human rights.
So why is it not human-centered?
We have this very big
Yeah.
in the core, actually in the framing of it, I think Brother can bring this. When we're looking at labor rights,
Yes.
now there's a shift now to human
Yes,
and
labor rights, yeah.
because of the workers' company to bring it to alignment. However, the point my brother is bringing is exactly what we, in a certain context, arrived at. See, once we universalize and bring the human element, we're then into a difficult territory of getting our rights against that. People-centered is context specific.
Yes, yeah.
That is the critical thing. Like what Ghana wants as these people is different from
Yeah,
what
yes.
Kenya wants. But within the framework of ensuring that human rights, rights are key in people-centered driven justice. I think that's where the shift comes from the universality. There are those basic universal rights stand up, but they shouldn't dampen the spirit, because that's why we are in this discussion, for example, because some people have used the universality of this universal rights, for example, to actually empower themselves and make others vulnerable. So in order to trace, we're not in any way watering down the universality of certain basic rights, but we're saying they have to be context-based.
So
So just would you repeat what you said again? People-centered?
With the human, considers human rights.
People-centered just transition in the context of human rights. Okay, fine. I think that's quite well understood. So I think that comes back to maybe the work of the energy group. There was something about minimum energy standards,
Yes.
which also is, I think, universal when you say minimum energy standards, isn't it?
But it's also context specific.
Okay.
Because in some places, my minimum acceptable standard would be a light bulb and one charger. For some people, they would need for their washing machines, and so I feel like minimum is very different. Some people want security lights. Some people don't need. Not that they don't need that, but it's not the minimum acceptable standard. So I feel like standards on one hand is, of course, the quality of that's different. I think we're now talking about minimum standard of energy access in terms of from an access perspective.
I think at the international forums, the language that is used is about universal access to energy.
Yes.
Which then I think so. Are we saying as a platform that is not?
No, I think universal access is useful.
Yeah.
Universal access, we want universal access, but with a minimum standard of energy access, a minimum. So there should be a minimum level. Yes, universal access.
Which varies.
Yes, which varies, I think.
Then that is not universal then, right?
So universal access, yes, the whole community has access. But maybe me, I can only afford, and what I can afford is one bulb. But one bulb is not meeting my minimum acceptable standard to have energy access. So while yes, it's universal because there's a connection that runs through the community, but for me, I haven't met my minimum, in quotes, acceptable standard of access.
Your air conditioner.
Yes.
Your washing machine.
And for some people, yes. So in the communities, for instance, in the city, different standards. Some people want air conditioning, some people just a fan. But if I can't afford to light my bulb and my fan at the same time, just because maybe it's too expensive or whatever, then have I really gotten my minimum energy access, the standard of energy access that I actually need, the minimum? I think that would be the question. So I think universal access, yes. There should be, in quotes, a source of connection, hopefully. But is it meeting your minimum standard? Also, sometimes for some people, they don't even get full current. So it could be that, I remember, you could have electricity, but you don't have full current that you can actually use meaningfully.
Right, yeah.
So I feel like, yes, universal, but also the minimum acceptable standard of access, which is context specific, I would say.
Yeah, but I think advance the aspect of just energy transition, the aspect one, energy democracy, that's very important, and of course the justice element in terms of the energy access. You cannot talk about energy access only. You must have an aspect of affordability of the energy itself, and also the productive use of energy, and that's very important. So when you try to unpack the whole discourse, then you must start from the aspect of who is actually involved in the decision making of decentralized energy, and of course, to what is the purpose of that energy? Is it for productive use? Is it for household use, etc., etc.? But of course, coming back to the aspect of the championing on the low carbon development pathways that many climate justice advocates are pushing for, and the push for renewable energy investment in Africa, then you must ask yourself, is the context of renewable energy investment is for who? And what is it meant to do? Because one, you must ask yourself, does Africa has the technology to drive the renewable energy? Where is the technology coming from? Do you look at the aspect of the affordability of the technology itself? We are in a situation where we cannot maintain much of the renewable energy technologies that we have in Africa, be it from solar or other forms of energy. So we actually exacerbating the risk in the continent in the name of increasing renewable energy access in the continent, and the issue of electronic waste is something that we will struggle with for many years. The other thing that we need to put into perspective is the development paradigm in Africa. And I think Ruth mentioned something yesterday which was very important, especially on the industrial policy for our countries in Africa. Do we really have those industrial policies that basically underpin the kind of industrial development and the kind of productive economy that we need to develop as a continent? And that speaks to different issues. One is what are we really producing as a continent, and what do we need, which sectors do we really need to develop as a continent? Are we really prepared for the kind of development that we want to see in the future that will drive economic growth, will have the kind of jobs for the young people in this continent? But the thing with the whole discourse of renewable energy technology, in our training institutions, we have not enhanced the skills of our young people, and that cuts across both women, men, girls, etc., in actually ensuring that, one, they innovate. Number two, they also maintain the technologies that come with that renewable energy. The aspect of stranded assets in the continent, it's a big discussion. Who pays for assets that we have left on the ground in terms of mineral resources? Basically, we have abandoned resources that we were supposed to use for our own development, and we are pushing for our own renewable energy revolution. That is a justice element in a sense. If you look at what has driven economies in Europe, for example, Germany, etc., even at the moment, the cost of running even a single household in Germany can run like a certain industry at a minimal scale in Africa. So, and if you look at the source of that energy itself, is from resources that we have in the continent.